Naeem Kalwar is one of our extension soil specialists located in Langdon, up not too far from the Canadian border. And with irrigation across the state, saline and sodic soils are an important concept because irrigation water can contribute to it or make it worse. So, Naeem, I'll turn it over to you to talk about saline sodic soils.
Yeah, Tom, am I a co-host or no? Because I tried to, okay, so it's only giving me the option to share my sound, so it's not letting me do it.
I think they got you listed as a co-host.
Yeah, you should. So when you hit the green share screen button, do you have sound or video in your materials?
I have sound.
Okay.
The share.
When you have the share menu bar show up, there'll be a couple of check boxes in the bottom left corner of that window. If you check on that to optimize for video.
Yeah, my optimize for video is somehow disabled, and so is the share.
Let's see. Julie, let's take it off of share and reissue it and see if that helps.
Okay.
Okay,
it's
still same thing.
Yeah, same thing. I don't know what's going on. This is the first time. Yeah.
Tom, do you have this presentation that maybe you could share it? Would that work?
Yeah, I've got a.
Would that work for you, Naeem? And then if Tom would just run your slides.
Yep, that would be fine.
Okay, let me find it here real quick.
I don't know why this is happening though.
We don't either.
Okay. It says one participant.
Maybe we have too many co-hosts. Maybe we'll remove some of the co-hosts and see if that helps us.
Okay, I got the option now.
Oh, okay.
It's still okay. The share button, it's still, I'm not able to, I don't know what's going on today.
Let me see if I can bring it up, Naeem.
Okay.
You've got a screen up, Tom, but it's your website screen. You have to pick it. You have to pick the PowerPoint screen. So you have to unshare that, and then when you hit the share button, click on the image of the PowerPoint. And again, when that menu bar or that window comes up in the bottom lower left corner of that menu screen, there'll be an optimized video or sound.
It should.
I think it has got to do with the settings, the way you guys have set up controls. I don't know.
Everything we see from our control center, so to speak, shows you as able. So we're not clear what's.
Would you, just for this presentation, if you guys wanted to make me host quickly, then once I finish my presentation, I could pass it on?
Sure, let's try that. Okay, the control is yours.
Still not able to get it. This is what Tyler was talking about, probably. I don't know.
Tom, you're still working on it in your end?
Do you want to make me a host, and Tom, you could email it to me or Lance?
Yeah.
Maybe we could try it on our end.
Yeah, I'll send it real quick here.
Okay, Tom, I've just made you a host back because there's no point for me being host. I'm not able to do anything.
Wow, the last
Everything
day
went so smooth yesterday.
and a last day of a 3-week convention where it all went pretty well, but
Okay, give me 1 second. Can you guys see my screen now?
yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened there.
Okay, and it's got the preview slides to the left and your.
Okay,
So
how
it's-
about now? Do you see the full slide or no?
There's still a preview screen now on the right. The next slide is showing up.
Okay, so display settings. What is screen you see now?
There you go. That's what you wanted. I think.
Okay,
Just
okay. So we
There you
lost
go.
some time, but
Okay.
okay. Sorry about that. I'm Naeem Kalwar. Again, like Tom introduced me, I work out of Langdon, North Dakota for NDSU. I'll talk about soil salinity and sodicity, which in my view are two serious soil health concerns, and they can actually result in total loss. The challenge I find about managing them that they're often, these two problems are slightly different from each other, but they are often confused with each other and they're lumped together. Even though they are different from each other, they cause different issues for plants and soils, and they require slightly different management practices. So if we look at, for example, what is soil sodicity compared to salinity? Sodicity happens when we have excessive sodium, which is a chemical ion with a positive charge, gets attracted to a soil particle, for example, clay. Clay or humus have negative charges. Sand and silt do not have any charges. So excessive sodium, when it gets attracted to a soil particle like clay, it causes sodicity, or soil dispersion is the process. Salinity happens when there are excessive levels of water-soluble salts. Example of a salt would be, say, sodium chloride, which is table salt. Both chloride and sodium are chemical ions. They have positive and negative charges. Together, they form a salt. And a salt or salinity issue could not just be sodium-based salt. It could be sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, potassium chloride. That would be the salinity issue. But the sodicity is only caused by sodium, which is not present as a salt. That means it's not attracted to a chemical ion and it's attracted to a soil particle like clay or humus. And as long as sodium is present as a salt, it will not cause sodicity. It will cause salinity. Here's an example of what salinity can do to plants. So if you look at the picture, on the left-hand side, there's a green, healthy growing plant in a soil where the salt levels are low and plant is able to take up the water it needs for its growth. On the right-hand side, there's a drought-stressed plant growing in a soil with a lot of salts. So these salts basically compete with plant roots for water. And salts are trying to keep the water in the soil. Plant is trying to take up or pull the water molecule towards its roots. But if the pull is too strong in the soil, then plants are not take up that water, and the result would be drought-distressed plant. And in a severe case, probably we won't even get any germination, and even if there would be some germination, plants will just die. And here's an example of sodicity. So salinity affects plants directly. Sodicity doesn't affect plants directly. It actually affects soils by causing dispersion. So when sodium forms these combinations with, say, clay and humus, humus part would be way smaller than clay. Say sodium plus clay, that clay particle will start breaking away from soil aggregates or the larger chunks of the soils. And that would shrink down or plug soil pore space. So in this picture, you could see there's severe dispersion going on in the surface soil layer, and the water is just sitting there. And in the deeper depths, there are larger aggregates or chunks of soils, so you would be having decent porous space through which water and air can move. And this is a concern when it comes to, say, improving subsurface drainage through tiling, for example. This is a big concern. Salts do not pose a threat to tiles, for example. It's the sodicity part. Number one step, which we could do to start the process for managing salinity and sodicity, is to take samples. We often see the white salt crust at the surface, but we don't know how high the salt levels are. And then also sodicity, unfortunately, it's very difficult to find the clear visual symptoms right at the soil surface. So we got to create zones. For fertility, we could do grid sampling. But for this kind of a sampling, because these spots differ from each other, for example, some areas produce marginal crop stands. Some will not support any annual crop, but there would be weeds like foxtail and barley growing, and some spots won't even support that. So if we mix soil from different type of areas, then we'll get an average. So you want to create zones and then take separate samples from each zone, and by taking 2 to 3, 4 cores to make a composite representative sample. And then we want to get those samples tested for electrical conductivity for salinity, sodium absorption ratio for sodicity, and pH by using saturated paste extract method. So I'm emphasizing on the method because different method can give you different numbers, even though it would be the same soil sample analyzed by the same soil lab. And then we like to go 3 to 4 feet deep in 12-inch increments. For fertility, the regular depths are 0 to 6, 6 to 24 inches, because most of the plant nutrients are in the first 3-4 inches. But salts, for example, can move up and down very quickly from deeper depths to the topsoil, or from the 1st foot to the 4th foot in 2 or 3 seasons, depending upon how much rain we get and how good the soil water infiltration is. And then get each depth analyzed separately for EC, SAR, and pH. Now, if, for example, we establish that there is a sodicity issue, that would mean that we'll have to apply amendments like, for example, gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, to take care of the sodicity part, not for salinity part, the sodicity part. Then we'll need another test, which is CEC, or cation exchange capacity. Again, method is very important. Sodium saturation method, for example, and we need only that test for the first 12 inches. Then we need to label the samples clearly for the lab to identify, to separate them, and then communicate to the lab what test we want through what method. This is very important, and I'm going to give you an example. So these soil results belong to one producer who took I helped him with soil sampling. He sent them to soil testing lab. And I'll just point out a couple different differences which are coming from using different methods. So CEC, I mentioned, cation exchange capacity. If you look, it's mentioned as milli equivalent per 100 gram, the first result at the top. The regular method to test that CEC is summation or addition method, but that gives you artificially high value, especially if our soil salt levels are high. So this number is 50.6. Now you look at the cation exchange capacity by sodium saturation method, right underneath that, 16.8. Same sample, analyzed by the same lab, just using a different method. So it's 3 times less. And this is a true soil CEC. Now, if you look at the soil salinity or soluble salt levels, the regular method is 1:1, which is 3.43 on this slide, or the result. And that's, again, the regular method. And if I would look at that number and I would have to decide what crop I should plant, I would say barley and oats should do good. Well, the actual CEC, which is measured through saturated paste method, is 6.5, 6.50. So at 6.5, I would say no. We have to go for a perennial salt-tolerant grass mix, because even barley and oats or beets, which are the most 3 salt-tolerant annual crops we have in our estate, are not going to do well. So we got to be consistent. If we don't know what method was used to get these tests done, those numbers actually could be misleading. Here is an example. So say, for example, we establish there is Sadisticity. Next step would be, okay, what should we do? Whether we apply gypsum or beet lime. So here around Northeast, we mostly have high pH, so we go for gypsum, which is way more soluble than, say, beet lime as well. So say if our Sadisticity number or SAR number is 10.71, now SAR starts creating problem when the number starts getting over 5. So the difference between initial and final is that I deducted 5. We want to bring that 10.71 to 5. So 10.71 minus 5.71, sorry, minus 5 is 5.71. Then the formula we used, which is the USDA formula, it converts SAR into exchangeable sodium percent, or ESP, which is 6.68. If you keep these numbers same, and use 2 different CECs numbers, which are from the previous slide. One was 50.6, which was artificially high. The other one was a true CEC, 16.8. Then we use ESP and CEC numbers to calculate exchangeable sodium milliequivalent per 100 gram. And we multiply that number by 1.7 tons of 100% pure gypsum to get our recommendations. If we use the higher CEC number, our recommendations for gypsum would be 5.75 tons per acre. That, according to the true CEC, it would be 1.91. So there's a difference of 4 tons per acre. And just to give you a perspective, the CEC through summation or addition method, NDSU lab charges $15. And for the sodium saturation, NDSU lab charges $25. So if you pay $10 per test more in the beginning, you'll save a lot more money during that process. I'm going to first quickly talk about the steps to remediate salinity. Number one thing is to lower groundwater depth. Because if we have very shallow groundwater depths and low-lying areas, say for example, if our groundwater depths are 1.5 feet below the surface, the rainwater, or if we have good quality irrigation water, it will force the salts to that depth and everything is just going to sit there. So we got to take care of that problem. Otherwise, we won't be able to get rid of salts or acidity, whether we do it through surface or subsurface drainage. We also need to reduce evaporation. So the rainwater, which pushes the salts into deeper depths, is free gravitational water after whatever is held by plants in the soil. The other water, which is the capillary water, which wicks up in whether from the bottom to top or sideways, and the principle it works with is it moves from wet to dry area. So if we have even groundwater depth 6 feet below the surface, and if our topsoil is dry, then water will start wicking up from that 6 feet below the surface, and it'll keep wicking up, depends how much clay we got, because clay and organic matter, because this water moves with the forces of adhesion and cohesion, which are attraction of water molecules for each other and attraction of water molecules for soil, clay, or humus particles. And this water, by the way, is not intercepted by tiles. This could be intercepted by plant roots. So we got to reduce the evaporation. Problem is that these saline areas do not regularly support good crop extent, so we'll have more evaporation. On top of it, sometimes people just till these areas. That actually exposes the topsoil to sunlight more, and it results in even more evaporation and more water wicks up. And our groundwater has high levels of salts and sodium in it. So we'll end up with more issues. We also need timely rain in decent quantities to force these salts into the deeper depths. And by that I mean, if you got 2 inches in 2 hours, there would be runoff. Water has to go into the soil, infiltrate through the soil. And then if we got, say, during the growing season, if the soils are very dry and if you got 100 or 200s, there would be no free gravitational water to force the salts into the deeper depths. So if we have a smaller gap between evapotranspiration and rain, mostly we are semi-arid here, we almost always have more evapotranspiration than the rain, even in a wet year, if you look at the end-on numbers. But if we have a narrower gap between these two, there would be more leaching and less waking up. But a bigger gap, and I'll give you an example quickly. So say if our evapotranspiration is 35 inches in a year, and if we got rain, which is 22 inches, so there's a gap of 13 inches between these two. But if next year our evapotranspiration is 35 inches and our actual rain is 15 inches, now we got a 20-inch gap. So a bigger gap between these two means less leaching and more waking up. This is just a quick example of what can we establish on these saline areas. So we planted a barley and oat trial here at the research center this year on a gradient where we had low to moderate levels of salinity and sodicity, especially in the first 6 inches, and then moderate to high and very high. We tried 4 barley varieties and 4 oat varieties. So this by no means is not a very good spot. It had an EC of 3.99 in the surface and 7.12 SAR in the first 6 inches. But you could see how barley and oat varieties are growing here. We actually got the highest barley variety yield here was about 100 point something, and then the oats, the highest yield was 122. And looking by Tyler's results, it's by no means, again, very high, but you got good options, because if you planted soybeans here, you will have very poor germination. But the question was how salt tolerant even these crops are. So here's what happened to the same varieties, comparing same varieties, not just all barley and oat varieties. Then our salt and sodicity levels went from low to moderate to high. So EC levels here in the surface went from 3.99 or 4 to 7.5, for example, and SAR levels also doubled from 7 to 14 or 15. And look what happened to same barley and oat varieties. And here, both EC and SAR were very high in the surface. Barley, all 4 varieties didn't even germinate until we combined the trial on September 15. Oats had little bit of germination in some plots, especially the ND Heart variety. It yielded 5 bushels per acre. And by no means, again, that's a very good yield. It won't even cover the cost of planting. But what I learned from here that oats can actually do a little bit better than barley on these kind of spots. So what should we do here? So if we have spots like this, and here's an example, this is a picture of our long-term groundwater management project, which was tiled in 2014, and we applied the amendments in 15. This is how it looked in the spring of 15 after tiling. And here, no annual crop will survive. So what we did, we planted a perennial salt-tolerant grass mix. And I would like to emphasize, not all perennial grasses are salt-tolerant. So I'm emphasizing on the word salt-tolerant perennial grasses. And I planted that mix in August or September of 2015. And here's how the same site looked. So there are options available there. It's crucial to establish some kind of a vegetative cover. Otherwise, the problems are just going to get worse. Here's a producer field in 2012. We tried everything on this piece of land. Nothing was growing. We took some soil samples, analyzed them for ECSAR, and then he planted same grass mix, perennial salt-tolerant grass mix, and it threw in some alfalfa in it. This is how it looked in 17, but he got hay in 14, 15, 16, and 17. And somehow alfalfa started getting established 3 years after planting the grass mix. Grasses started establishing in 1 year, which they normally take. This year, he actually planted wheat, which looked fabulous. I don't have the yield numbers with me, but the crop looked very good. So we'll come back to what we should do. So here is a picture of a saline headland. I won't use the word Sodic because I don't have the soil results from it, but I could tell you based off my over 8 years of experience of working in Langdon, 99.999%, if you have a salt issue, you will have a sodicity issue, or you will have high magnesium levels compared to calcium. So what is happening here on the right hand side, there's a higher productive ground. On the left hand side, we have a roadside ditch. When it rains, excess water moves downwards towards the ditch, and ditch doesn't flow very well because there's road there. And I would like to say this, that, you know, when we built these roads, they didn't think about the natural drainage. And most often, if you look, if you drive, this is why we find these spots along the roads, whether they are county roads, whether they are highways, because they just compacted that soil, water cannot move on the other side, and then there's no good flow for the ditches either. So higher productive grounds get drier, and then but there's still a standing water in the ditch and the headlands, and the capillary water moves from wet to dry area, so it starts waking up. And every year these rings are getting bigger and bigger. So look, just by looking at it, I don't think that even barley and oats will provide a good mix. And annual crops, we have to replant them every year. If I would be this farmer, I would plant that perennial salt tolerant grass mix. And some of the grass varieties like Western wheatgrass, its roots can go 5 to 6 feet deep and 3-4 years if we manage them. By that I mean either mow them, hay them, or graze them. And that will intercept that water before it would wake up to the higher productive ground. Now, I've heard some people also say that we'll be sacrificing some land by putting that 30-40 feet wide strip in a permanent perennial cover. Here's my question. How much land we are sacrificing right now? And we are losing money for planting annual crops, which is a net result, a net loss. Here's a mix, which we have used very successfully. Tall wheatgrass, slender wheatgrass, western wheatgrass, green wheatgrass. The reason it's in red because it's a mix of bunch and quick grasses. And so if you're planting it close to a native pasture, cannot kill it with the Roundup, then stay away from that. Otherwise, it's a very good salt-tolerant grass. And Russian wild rye. The seeding rate for all 5 grasses would be about 8 pounds per acre. When you go and purchase a seed, some people may tell you use 13, 14, 15 pounds per acre, but I can tell you that I've tried 7 to 8 pounds per acre, and it has always worked. That way you could keep your seeding costs below to about $35 per acre. These grasses, I just want to warn you, they'll take about 1 year to get established and about 2 years to suppress the weeds on their own. And there are 2 best times to plant them. One is in the spring, they're cool season grasses, or the second time is dormant planting in the fall. But again, I would like to confess, I have planted them in August, September, even in July. You could drill them, you could spread them and harrow them over. They'll just do fine. They're quite hardy. Quick comparison. If our crop rotation is canola, spring wheat, soybean, and corn, these are NDSU crop budgets. I think they are 2019. We will spend about $535 in 4 years just to plant these crops, fertilizer, seed, and fuel cost at the time of planting. And you saw what areas I showed you. These crops would be a net loss. Instead of that, if we planted the same perennial grasses along with 1 to 2 pounds of winter hardy alfalfa, because we again found out at 2 different sites that these grasses somehow nurture alfalfa, and 3 years after planting a grass mix with only 1 to 2 pounds of alfalfa suddenly started getting established. Your seed cost would be roughly about $45 per acre. If you wanted to control the weeds in the second year, about $14 per acre. And this is exactly what we did here. And even if you don't sell the hay, even though this is okay to good hay, depending upon when you cut it, if you want to mow it, that is very important to cut the grasses. If you don't cut them, you're not going to get the best out of them. Because when you cut the top, roots go deeper. And that's where your benefits come. So say, for example, if you mow them 3 to 4 times a year, depending upon how much rain we get, $10 per acre per mowing. So your total cost in 4 years would be about $140. You'll be saving $400 and you would be improving your land. Now, Sodicity, it requires one extra step. You'll still need to follow the salinity recommendations, but it will require one extra step. So Sodicity will only happen if our calcium levels in the soils are lower than sodium. And you don't need amendments for salinity, it's only for Sodicity. So we'll have to add calcium artificially by applying amendments. For example, calcium sulfate, which is gypsum. So when we add calcium sulfate to the soil, you have to till it in. Calcium will separate from sulfate with the help of water, and it'll go and remove sodium from the soil particle exchange sites, and sodium will come into the soil water. And calcium, because it has 2 positive charges, it'll help build aggregates again. That's called chemical aggregation. And then that will improve soil structure and soil water infiltration. When sodium comes into soil water, it will attract a negatively charged ion to form a salt. So by applying amendments will first convert Sodicity into salinity issue. This is my last slide, Tom, because I know I'm probably going over time and we already lost some time while figuring out how to get my PowerPoint. We have a long-term research project here, which is tiled. We are checking out the efficiency of tiles on saline sodic areas. We have applied amendments. The land has been tiled for 6 years, and we applied amendments 5 years ago. There's a notion out there that you tile the land and salts will just vanish. You need decent water, rainwater, to do that. In order for the tiles to do their job, you need decent rain or wet weather and good soil water infiltration. I heard the word water infiltration in previous presentation, and I cannot emphasize more about the importance of good soil water infiltration. Even if our weather is wet, you saw one picture where there was severe dispersion going on in the surface layers, and that means we don't have good infiltration. We will not get timely drainage of the soil water, and the salt levels are not going to change either. So in 2014, when we tiled the site, the EC levels ranged from 8 something. 16, we got 25 inches of rainfall, and our salt levels were high too. So we reduced that excess water under tiling, reduce EC levels to say 3, 3.5. But in 17, when the weather got dry, the groundwater depths were lower, but we didn't have enough water to force these salts down. And because of the dry weather, there was more capillary movement of soil water towards the surface. So actually EC levels increased back to 6. They didn't go back to the 2014 levels, but they increased compared to 2016. And that trend has continued in 18, 19, and 20. Sodicity is much more complex because it takes a long time for these amendments to get dissolved and create the chemical reaction. So despite 5 years, Sodicity levels have not changed or lowered. Last point I want to make that we also take water samples, whatever is coming out of the tile drainage, tile field. We have a lift station, and we send these samples to Department of Health. And that water is draining into a surface drainage ditch. So we take upstream and downstream samples from that ditch as well. And then we get them tested for same stuff. So far in 5 years, we have sent 10 sets of samples to Department of Health. And all of the sample results suggest, and we get a lot of different things checked. This is just summary, that the water which is coming out of this tile field is adding more salts, SAR or sodicity, calcium carbonate or lime, which increases soil pH, sulfate, nitrate, nitrogen, and selenium, and other trace elements. So when we are tiling fields, this is something which, before we compile all the results, at least I wasn't thinking about that. But now I think that people should consider that if you want to do that, and if tile did their job, what are going to be the consequences for the neighboring fields or the surface water resources? So with that, I'm going to end my presentation. And Tom, I don't know whether I have time for any questions or no. I could stay until the end and then try to answer the questions at that time.
Thanks, Naeem. Why don't we just go on, and then afterwards, after the last one, we can pick up any